Hello. I'm Bec.
And I'm Annie.
And welcome to the Career Coven. Today we are talking about career planning and self-development. I think on some of these things, you and I are going to be super aligned, and on some of them, we're going to be really different.
I would concur. We've got very different careers. So that's why this is such an interesting podcast for people.
Hopefully. So, shall we start with our careers today? Annie, how much of your career has been planned?
Almost zero. So the first job I got, I just got it because everyone was getting jobs and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I got a job in an executive search, thinking that was like just a job that people do. And that was not at all well planned. And then after a year, I didn't want to do that job, even though now looking back on it, it was a very, very good place to start a career. So then I did a master's, and after that master's, I did 2.5 years of strategy consulting for the NHS, and my master's was in public health, and that move was very planned. I'd seen everywhere that strategy consultants get good jobs, and it sort of sets you up for like having a decent career, and I thought that looks sensible. Let's do that. I really care about the NHS. Everything since then, so that's almost 4 years professional life. Everything after that has not been planned. This most recent move is much more planned than anything else. But I have made some quite opportunistic moves in the past, some of which have been absolutely great and others of which have probably been less great. But I'm not a planner. And I'm probably now trying to experiment with being a bit more of a planner.
I think it's fine not to be a planner. Not everyone needs to be a planner. I am like a planner to a fault, which I think is sometimes helpful and sometimes really not. I'd say I've planned some of my career, but not all of my career. Like, I think when I started work, I just looked at all of the amazing women who were either line managing me or who I thought were really incredible and said, if I want to be on the same trajectory as them, this is what I need to do.
That is a plan. You have made a plan.
Yeah, I'd say like from age 21.
Okay, so your entire working life, you maybe did some volunteering that wasn't planned.
So I think I had some end goals in mind, but I didn't have any interim goals. So at like age 21, I was like, all of these amazing women are directors in big organizations, and they're in their early 30s. So I was like, cool, I want to be a director at 30. And having that as my like pacing metric for progression put a very intense amount of pressure on myself.
Yeah.
And when
How
I
was that?
finally, I mean, I think when I wasn't sure I was going to make it in my own internal deadline, I was having coaching at the time, and the coach was basically like, "You're kind of nuts. Like, this is just a random goal that you've set yourself, and what would happen if you didn't achieve it?" And I was like, "I'd just be sad for my 21-year-old self," like an absolute bell end. But I
that
did
is
hit
quite
it.
mad.
Yeah, I know, completely bonkers. But I think what I have found since then is that I no longer have the same sort of quite insane goal to reach for. So maybe my progression has slowed, but I'm also cool with that.
That's good.
It feels like I'm a bit more comfortable in myself. I don't have anything to prove to myself. I mean, I don't care about others, I only care about myself. But that was planned. And I think, I don't know if this exactly counts as planning, but every time I've changed jobs, it has been a refinement of what I know that I do and don't like. And I think everyone works a bit like that. So in one of my first roles, I was doing a very like delivery focused role. And I thought, you know what, I'm really good at project management, but I fucking hate it. And I'd sort of said like strategy sounds good, and that's always been a theme that I've come back to over and over in each
Mm.
role. And I think every role that I've taken has been a refinement of me working out the right mix of skills that make me happier and more fulfilled within a role. And I think that has really helped me progress as well, because I just do genuinely believe if you like your job and you like the things that you do, you will be better at them than if you didn't.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. And I think that is like one of the, I guess, privileges of getting more experienced in the workplace is that you should get to refine and hone things down to doing more of what you enjoy and less of what you don't enjoy, I think.
yeah. But I think, there have been moments in my career where I have not had a fucking clue what I wanted to do. And I'm like trying to weigh up like five completely different options. Um,
Mm,
and and you're like, maybe I'll become well, actually, there was a version of me that wanted to become a strategy consultant, and then I did an
yeah.
interview at McKinsey and was like, "Oh, this place is giving me the ick." But the sorry
Wow.
if there are any McKinsey listeners out there. It wasn't for me, but I'm happy it worked out for you. But I think it's quite difficult to try on um, different things and see how they feel. And I've bought you a book, I think twice by
Yeah.
accident, which I found
Yes.
really
Twice.
helpful.
You bought me it twice. I've still not read it. But I do have it on both my home, my parents' home shelf and my own home shelf. So there's no way I should be reading it. Um,
I think if
I
you
will
don't
read it.
feel like you need to, then that's okay. But it is really good if anyone is thinking about, I don't really know what I want to do next. I've got a rough idea of like some sort of insane ideas, and I want to actually work out what that would look like. There are some really helpful exercises in that book.
I mean, that would have been very good for me.
So yeah, it's a really phenomenal book if you're feeling a bit stuck or confused or just not knowing how to evaluate what to do next, and some really practical tips. So we'll definitely recommend that and we'll put it in the show notes. What is on your development plan now?
Yep, I've got a few things, as always. One is focusing on one thing at a time. I'm definitely someone that likes to have like multiple things going on, executing a lot across a lot of a lot of different dimensions at once. And I think that having a bit more depth and a bit more focus is something I need to work on. Um, Another thing is having higher standards across everything I do. As I've mentioned, I'm very, very 80/20. And whilst I don't want to change that about myself, I can also recognize that there are, some things that require like the 90%, and I could probably push a bit harder to for excellence in some ways. And I'm always working on better communication. I'm always working on giving and receiving more feedback. And I also am working on this and my Substack where I write about stuff as like personal projects that I think fit into personal development. Um,
Mm,
so those are just some of my things on my stack right now. What about you?
we should both probably say we both have Substacks and we'll put them in the show notes. But yeah, I think like we have some similar and some different. I think for me, I've been trying to bring more coherence to who I am professionally when those themes and kind of activities have felt a bit disjointed
Mm.
previously, and just trying to bring a bit of congruence to what I'm doing. And sometimes that also means stopping doing something if it just doesn't really fit in with the vision that I have for myself. I
What's
also
congruence? Can I ask what is
just
congruence?
making things make sense and align together.
Right, yeah.
So making it feel less disjointed, and
Okay.
more coherent, and more kind of centered, and clear in what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Basically, I have had historically a problem of saying yes to everything, and
Mm,
that is a
interesting.
fast way to have no free time. And it's also a fast way to having a bunch of random shit on your to-do list where you're like, I don't think I need to do that. So my development area is just saying no to stuff.
Which is good. That is a very good development area. I think a lot of people could use that as a development area for sure.
I think I've found pregnancy really humbling for this, because I've just not been able to do anywhere near as much as I would like to do or have done previously. So um,
Mm,
being forced to really strictly prioritize has been, um, like, I liked that I had to be forced to do it, because otherwise I don't think I would have seen the value in it. But I've
yeah.
basically only been doing work, the podcast, and a handful of other things. And even that is quite
Growing a human.
growing a human. Like, I think this week we're growing hair. So
That is a lot of work. That is a lot of
yeah, I
work.
would love for him to have luscious locks.
I'm sure he will.
I think in my work context, what I'm working on is, it's almost the opposite of what you were saying. I'm working on being less of a perfectionist,
Yeah.
and that also means loosening the reins and the expectations that I have, of myself, but also of others as well, and working more on releasing control of things
Mm,
and trying to influence the outcomes rather than trying to hold on to full control myself. So those are the
yeah.
bits that I'm working on, um, mostly for myself, just so I'm happier at work. But
Mm.
it's all very good fun. Talk to me about what you think about, like, learning and development opportunities, and how you should do this inside or outside a company.
Yeah, I have quite a kind of maybe extreme view on this, which is I think learning and development is like solely your own individual responsibility. And I'm not saying that I don't think organizations should facilitate it and support it. Like, I absolutely think they should. But I think it is up to you to figure out, like, how you want to and how you should professionally develop, and then to take steps to find ways to do that that are quite proactive. In my experience, I would suggest that when you try and, as a manager, kind of force learning and development onto people that don't want to do it, it usually doesn't really work. There are potentially a few
Mm.
examples of, um, there are potentially a few exceptions to that. Like, I think you've talked about going on a RADA training course. And I don't know whether you
Mm.
like really wanted to do that, but I was actually made to go on one of them very early in my career, and I did not want to go at all. But that would then, I think those courses are so good when you're there that I was like, okay, I sort of reluctantly see the value of this. But other than that, I think it's really your own responsibility to figure out what to do, where to do it, and then it's the organization should definitely support you. But I don't think line managers should be like mapping out your L&D plans, because no one's good at learning stuff they don't really want to learn. What's your view on L&D? I mean, we work in very different sorts of organizations, so I can imagine that there may be some differences here.
Yeah, I think, um, it's really hard to get good learning and development, like high quality L&D. I have done so many, like, different trainings where, frankly, they're really mediocre, and, like, the organization has paid for it and you're like, why on earth am I here? Like, I literally sat through a training. I won't say where or when, but it was about, like, advanced line manager training, and then it started talking about how you should have weekly one-to-ones with an agenda, and I was like, okay, bore off, I'm literally leaving.
Can't be
um,
bothered. Yeah,
but,
yeah, yeah. Cannot be bothered with that.
like, I I've been line managing for 7 years. Like, I'm cool, thank you. Um,
Imagine if you'd done
But
7 years and you'd never got to that. Like that would be the other extreme thing. Imagine doing 7 years and you've never got to even basic one-to-ones and agendas.
yeah, that's what I was quite concerned they were catering to, like a large majority of people who had never done that. And I was like, well, this is a terrible state of affairs. But
Wow.
like there are a few exceptions where like I've had really good training. That RADA one is one of them, which I can link whatever version of it is currently now running in the show notes. But I also I have always faced pushback from organisations in the amount of funding that they can give you to support whatever L&D you feel like you should go on. And I think in some instances that's fair enough because the L&D pot is really small per head, and they will always try and get you to do an internal training that they already have a kind of deal at scale on. So I kind of get that. I have always just paid out of pocket myself if I have found something that I've really wanted to do. And like that's not a decision that I think everyone would take or might be able to take. But I also just feel like if there is something that is really calling to you, just pay for it and do it. Don't wait for someone to kind of pay for you to be able to do that. I think you should. I also feel much more invested in those kind of opportunities if I
Agreed,
have
yeah.
paid for them, because I'm like, I have put my hard earned cash into this. Whereas if you get free training, you just internally value it a lot less, even though the value is exactly the same. I've
Agree.
spoken previously about doing an MBA. I think I've said this before. If that's the only thing that I think that I might say I regret doing, out of my
But you didn't pay for that one, did you? You didn't pay for that one,
I
importantly.
I didn't pay for that one, and I would never be able to pay for an MBA by myself because they are outrageously expensive. But again, maybe I would have enjoyed it more if I'd paid for it. I don't know. We'll never know. But I think also just so much about learning and development. The best learning and development that I've ever had is on the job. It's when you've been put super out of your
Yeah.
comfort zone and you've been forced to do something you've never done before, and you've been sort of baptism of fire given something and been like, oh my god, do it. Like the COVID crisis experience that I had, like that for me, that was the biggest growth period I will probably ever have in my career. And
Yeah, yeah.
although it was at points extremely horrific, I learned and grew like an enormous amount, way more than I would have otherwise, I think. What about you? Tell me about your best development experiences.
I mean, really, they are all on the job. Like, I have always done things that I'm really not qualified to do. I continue to choose roles where I really have no qualifications to actually do the role and just see what happens. That is sort of my career plan. And I I don't really remember many bits of formal training that I have even done. But what I would say is I think I mentioned this on a previous podcast episode. I have had some really useful externally delivered but internal trainings on like line management, feedback, supporting people in the workplace, that have been really, really helpful and really useful. So potentially I should have done more training, but I haven't. I haven't done very much at all. The RADA professional development course, when I did it for me, was specifically about public speaking. Um, and
Mm.
it was a real privilege to go on that when I was only 3 years into my career. Like, that was quite generous of that organization, and they only sent me. Um, and
Wow.
yeah, and at the time, I probably wasn't that grateful for that opportunity that I was being given. But Hannah, Ruth, if you're listening, which you're probably almost certainly not, I appreciate it now. Um, and it did help me feel more confident. I used to be really, really quiet in meetings, and I would always give like all of my contributions through like output, and I would never really speak up at the start of my career unless I was directly asked something. That's the only way you could kind of get me to speak up in a meeting. And yeah, I mean, I think that course plus a lot of learning on the job helped me get much better at that.
This also just made me think about other things that happen on the job, or actually that I've got through an organization. And I should say, you and I have spoken about this a lot, but coaching has played a really, really important
Yeah,
part in
yeah,
my
yeah,
career development. And
yeah.
for those who are listening who may not know about coaching, because I've definitely received a question directly about this from the pod. Um, Coaches usually, they you will have a one-to-one relationship with your coach. Generally, it will be for a fixed period of time,
Mm,
and ideally you're kind of working through a specific kind of challenge or problem or transition period. And the objective of those coaching sessions is to help you to bring clarity on what your kind of next steps are, and to feel good about that decision making, and to
yeah.
help you reach those conclusions yourself, rather than asking for advice, which would be a mentor. um,
Mm.
and I've had amazing coaches in my career. I know you have as well. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on coaching?
No, I think we feel similarly, which is it's been like absolutely instrumental to my career at certain points. I have certainly found it much more useful when there is a specific issue that you are trying to address and work through. I have also had experience of kind of longer term coaching, but that's more unusual. Many coaches like to work in well defined kind of blocks to get you through the decision. Um, yeah, what I would also say is like there can be a form of coaching which is more like coach mentoring, which is where it's sort of coaching you to find the right decision for you, but they also impart their wisdom in a professional domain that is kind of relevant to yours. And I think that can be really, really good. But what you will often find is that good coaches do not want to mix the two. You're either being coached or you're being like
Mm,
coach mentor, but they're very different because one is more like an advisor using their expertise to say, oh, in this situation in the past, I've done this. You might therefore want to think about this. Whereas coaching is much more, correct me if you disagree, but it's more about searching through your soul for the right path for you and navigating your own way forward. And they sort of guide you, but they will not tell you what to do.
oof, I think you just described that in such a spiritual way, Annie. I love it. Um, Fantastic.
Peace.
So good. I would subscribe to the cult of coaching. And I think actually coaching is something that's on, we haven't spoken about it yet, but is on both of our development plans as well. Coaching is something
Yeah.
that I think as a line manager is a phenomenal skill, but is also something that we both get asked by a lot of people to do. And it is I think, a gift if you have a coach, because really that person is holding space for you to explore your thoughts, and help guide you. So, could not rate coaching more highly. Um, okay, have you ever made any career decisions that you regret?
Have I ever made? Yes, yes, I have. I have. I made a move into an organization a few years ago that I don't regret doing the move, but the person who offered me the job offered me it as a consultant or a full time. And they said, just whatever you want, like you can have it either way. And I absolutely should have taken that job as a consultant, as a freelancer. It would have been a completely different role if I hadn't felt the pressure of like, this is my next kind of FTE role. And so I do regret that. I don't regret going there. I definitely would have taken that role. But I do regret kind of jumping into the commitment when I didn't need to. And
Mm,
I could have tried before I buy, and I think if you have the opportunity to kind of try before you buy as a consultant, if someone offers you that, that is like always a pretty good idea. Like, except for maybe when the job market is so uncertain. But if you back yourself to do a good job, the offer to start freelance and then go perm because you have some questions is generous and great. And I definitely regret not doing that. Um,
Brackets, you might get paid more.
oh, for sure. For sure would have got paid
Yeah.
loads more. And although I do hate doing freelancer tax, I can stomach that hatred. I think there are a few other career moves I possibly slightly regret, but not many. That's the only one that stands out as like I had an opportunity to do something different that would have been better and I didn't take it, and I do think that was a mistake. Um, Most of the other things are not are not things I could wholeheartedly say that I regret because I learned so much from doing them, and here I am today, the professional woman that I am. They've made me who I am. What about you?
It's a really interesting question. As I was listening to you answer then, I was thinking there are some themes in there that apply to me too. I don't think there is a job that I have taken that I would just wipe out of my CV. That being said, I obviously didn't enjoy all of them. And like when I was
Mm.
thinking about this, I was like, oh, my biggest regret was being forced to do a year in finance at Condé Nast, where on day one of my maternity cover role, I got restructured from strategy into finance, and then spent a
Oof.
year just doing horrible. I'm so sorry to the finance listeners here. It was so mind-numbingly dull, and I was so bad at Excel. But even then, like I learned one, I never want a career in finance, and two, I learned some Excel skills. I
Always
think
handy.
the some, not too many, and I think the when I think about what is there that I might regret, um, I reflect more on my decision making around circumstances. Like I think there, I won't say where
Mm.
or when, but there was a particular leader who had found out that I was leaving the company that they were um, very senior for and influential, and they sort of made this like really over the top exaggerated promise about like stay and we'll give you this role and we'll give you that, and what do you want and what do you need, and like basically just got strung along for ages
Mm.
having this conversation that actually materialized into nothing. And I think I don't regret that experience, but that's actually happened to me a couple of times where people have overpromised in a
Mm.
company, and I've just fallen for it because I want to believe that it's true. And actually, um, I now operate with like a much higher dose of skepticism about
Mm.
the stuff that is promised to me. But you know, unfortunately, some people just do overpromise and underdeliver, and I think
Yeah.
having a bit more um, savviness about myself earlier probably would have been helpful. But again, you have to learn that through being burned, I guess.
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think like it does happen a lot, doesn't it? The false promise. Um, it is important if you can to like get. I mean, not that this can always like mitigate it, but to like get things in writing and to like make sure things are really clear when someone says something to you in a meeting, but then it's not like followed through on. Um, you're really good at that. I think you hold people to account really strongly, which is great. But I imagine a lot of people do not have experience of doing that, and therefore have possibly been promised a lot of things that never quite materialize. And it's good to keep track of the promises as well, right? Because then you can be like, oh, hold on, wait, we're 6 months down the line, and I have not heard that again.
Yeah, totally. And like I think if you're working, if someone is dangling a carrot in front of you and has been for a really long time, and there is literally no sight of it coming whatsoever, you should probably have a think about whether it's ever coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, tips and rules of thumb for career planning. I will start with mine first.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I don't have any. Go, yeah, you go.
Planning for the next role that you have, look at what you're really good at and what you enjoy most, and how you can make the best of that combination first. You go.
Um, Plan how much money you think you really need,
Mm.
like, and then how much money you think you really want. And always have, like, I think lots of people have a top number that they want, but very few people have a bottom number that they're clear on. And I think it's good to know what your like true like bottom is, and be quite firm on that, because especially in like more startup cultures or more startup organizations where the pay ranges can be wild. They can be like, this is a chief marketing officer. It could be anything from 30 to 150K. It's like, whoa, right? Like what? So you might find your perfect role, but they might really, really lowball you. And like, make sure you know what your like minimum value is, even if you found this thing that's perfect for you. And I would encourage you to really, really not like have that as a hard line, and not have conversations where that is not going to be met. um I have definitely like undervalued myself before, quite significantly, I think, for like perfect opportunities or something I could talk myself into, where actually it was then really hard to live on that kind of wage. And if there's anyone kind of thinking of doing that, especially when you're at the start of your career, I would say, you know, if there is a minimum and you don't think you can actually live well below that, you probably won't be very happy if you do
Mm.
choose to then be below that. So just, you know, it is from a position of privilege that I say this, but just like think really carefully about that bottom number, because what I find is most people only think about the top number. Oh, I want to be on this, or I want to be on this, but we're not in an inflated pay moment right now in the job market. So also have a bottom number.
That's incredible advice. I've never thought about a bottom number before. That's really good. Um, I would say as my next one, I tend to think one or two job roles ahead of where I am.
Insane to me. It could be anything. I could be an astronaut 1 or 2 jobs from now.
I sort of have a broad sketch out of how I would like the next probably 3 years of my career to go. And that is not in detail, but that is broadly like in 3 years' time, this is what I want my life to look like. And that's how that fits around work. So for me, it's really helpful when I'm thinking about my career planning, is just also trying on the feeling of like what your life could be like in whatever time frame you want, and how you can reverse engineer that backwards. A bit like how I
Yeah.
was saying earlier when I said I want to be a director at 30, and then like how do you reverse engineer that to be true? Um,
Mm.
I'm a big fan of reverse engineering for what you want to do for career planning.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. You have to be careful of the thing that you said, which is like, if something happens, especially like circumstantial, personal life, where you don't meet those goals, just, you know, little tip to be kind to yourself. If
Yeah,
you have a really fixed plan and it doesn't happen, be kind to yourself, everyone. Be kind.
yeah. Don't be really mean to yourself like I was. I would also say that approach might not work for everyone, because I'm the kind of person who feels really motivated by like a goal that feels out of reach. Um, that's where I perform at my best, is when I basically want to prove to myself and maybe some other people, but mostly myself, that I could do that, because it feels a bit
Yeah,
impossible.
yeah.
But that also is not for everyone, for sure.
Yeah, that kind of type A overachiever vibe.
Insecure overachiever. Amen.
Mm.
All right, one more tip from you, Annie.
Don't join a great company with an average line manager. That
Yeah,
is not a good idea. Joining an average company with a great line manager can be a great idea. So I think what I'm saying is weight your manager more than weighting the company.
I would agree with that.
Yes. In most scenarios, I think the only thing is, like, if you're joining a tiny company like a startup, do check that they have like runway to hire you and stuff. Like, be practical, you know, check that they're not really running out of cash. Try and get them to be honest with you about the financial situation. Assuming that is fine and you can be there for, like, let's say a year, then weight the line manager more than the company.
I totally believe a line manager is really important. If you don't rate the person who's interviewing you, then I wouldn't even bother continuing to interview. I think that is super important. As my kind of final rule of thumb or tip for career planning, I would say it's really, really valuable to just start putting in loads of coffees with people out in the market. Like they
Network.
don't have to be recruiting. Totally. And like I
Network, network, network.
hate hate
Yeah.
networking, but it is really helpful. So like when I was going through a bit of a period of like exploring what I wanted to do, and when I was leaving the civil service, I was like, should I go and do a public affairs policy job? And then I spoke to someone super senior at one of the like major policy places, and I was just like, can you just tell me about like your day and like what do you do in your job? And like what's really important to you and how does that work? And it wasn't for an interview. I just was like, I need to be able to understand like what your world looks like so I can
Mm.
understand better if I'm actually interested in it rather than just theorizing about how I might be interested in it. I think it's just people are so happy to just be like, I just need a career chat because I want to understand blah blah blah. And as long as you're kind of
Mm.
clear that it's no strings attached, you're like, I actually just think your job's really fascinating and I want to know more. You can get 15 minutes with someone, even if it's a few months away. You can normally
Yeah,
get that. So
agreed.
I would say that. And actually, Annie, you're really good at this because I
Mm.
remember we've spoken about this before, not on the pod, but about speaking to leavers. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Oh yeah. I reference this shit out of companies before I join them. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's like reverse referencing. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. I reference all over the place. I reference my line manager. I ask people what they think of organizations. I try and get to know people who have like made interesting moves. But yeah, referencing is a really good way to like build a contact base. Anyone who has like left an organization that you're thinking of going to, asking them, do they have 5 minutes to chat about it? Really good way to build connections. I think like I do always say what you've just said as well, which is like always ask, always ask. Don't ask, don't get. Definitely worth trying. I would I would also say I am now, because I've done so much femtech, I'm now on the receiving end of such an extraordinary amount of asks from strangers that it's getting really hard for me to operationalize like any of them. So I think 15 minutes or sending over some specific questions that you can answer quite concisely, being really clear on the ask. So you said like you have a really fascinating career because of X. Fine, I would probably pay attention to that. I get a lot of like really quite general, how do I get a job in femtech? Could you help? And I'm like, I cannot do those things, which is one of the reasons I started my Substack is I do want to help people do that, but I just cannot do it on that like one-to-one scale anymore. But yeah, always ask because you do never know. Referencing the one thing I would like so hard agree with you about this is like people think that they can just switch their network on when they want to look for a job. And that is just so naive. So
Mm.
I think that like keeping this network, keeping in touch with people that you think are really interesting, that might do interesting things, that have done interesting things in the past, and not you don't have to overinvest, but I do think that is part of professional development. Like a lot of the power and leverage you have once you get more senior is also who you know, not just what you can do. um so yeah, think about your network, build it, be kind to people, yeah, etc etc. Good
And I would
advice.
say just also in the kind of tone of how you do that, try not to make it too transactional. Like when
Agree.
it feels like when it feels transactional and you haven't earned kind of trust and credibility in that connection, it coming in hot with like a strong ask with no context and no pre-established relationship to me always feels like a knee-jerk no.
Yeah, actually, I think you're probably spot on there with why I'm finding it so overwhelming at the moment is because I am getting a lot of those, and I'm a bit like, oof, whoa, how
I've just
much
I've
time
just
do you think
stopped
I have?
replying.
Yeah.
and reading LinkedIn messages because like I've got enough
Yeah.
things to do. I'm growing a baby. I don't have time for LinkedIn messages. Anyway, let's go to some listener questions. I think we've got two that are really important here. So the first one is, I feel inspired by lots of things I could do, but I find it hard to focus this into an actionable career plan. Where should I start? I'm totally going to take this one, if
Yeah,
that's
please
okay,
do.
Annie.
Please do.
Um, I would start by, as I just said, like having a load of coffees and catch ups and quick calls with people who are in the field of the thing that you're thinking
Mm,
about. I think it's a people, if you're genuinely enthusiastic and excited and approach someone with kind of compassion and care and interest and curiosity, that always is a conversation that feels more enjoyable for the other person as well. And
yeah.
you will just get a good sense of the aspects of their job. So sponge up as much as you can from other people about it. I think you can also just do your own research. You can listen to podcasts. You could do, there are lots of different ways that you can self-explore this without having a framework. I would say in the book that I mentioned at the start, that will be in the show notes, there is a particular exercise called Odyssey planning, which I think is absolutely incredible. I found it really helpful because it helps you to kind of look at the different career scenarios that you're considering and evaluate, like, do I have the right skills for this? Do I have the right network for this? Do I have
Yeah, that's
I'm
good.
struggling to think of another example, but and then it gets you to map out like what your life looks like over the 5 years, not just your career, but like your life. So, when I was looking at McKinsey, I was like, oh, I'm probably really wealthy, but extremely tired in 5 years' time. But you get to
Mm,
think about it more holistically. So I found that really
yeah.
helpful. So I would recommend that to anyone who's thinking of a career pivot and they're not quite sure where to go to. Last question for us, Annie, today. The
Hmm.
last few jobs I've had haven't worked out and I've lost confidence. I'm not sure I'm in the right industry and field. How do I work out what I should do?
Yeah, interesting. So I think, firstly, I'm sorry that you have lost confidence, and I really do know what that feels like. Um, and it often leads to, like, of course, failure leads to a lot of reflection and a lot of uncertainty. I would try and look back on those roles that you kind of say have not worked and identify what you learned from them, if there were any positives you could take from them, and what you might change if you had your time again there. And that might help you work out whether there is actually anything positive that can be taken from these experiences, because there probably is. And it will help you reframe those experiences into something more positive that is about like learning. And I have definitely really worked on this skill, like reframing failure as learning, and working on having a mindset like that has been very, very good for my overall confidence, and my ability and my resilience, my ability to kind of get back up after I've been knocked down. So that's what I would say is, like, look back at them with critical eye, question the thought that they were all just negative, try and identify what you'd learn, try and articulate what you might do differently if you had your time again, and then use those thoughts to think about what is the right next move for you. And remember that the next thing doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be a step in the right direction. Boom.
Yeah, I mean,
Mic drop moment from me there.
that was lovely, Annie. I would
Thank
say
you.
I did a program. This was ages ago before they launched Squiggly Careers, with Sarah Ellis and Helen Tupper, who are also amazing, and we'll link them in the show notes too. But in the course, they got you to map along a time horizon the highs and lows of your career and like try to start exploring what were the aspects of all of the highs and is there a theme around those. So I would encourage this person to kind of delve into when you felt really good in your
Mm.
career and that you were really thriving, what were the conditions that made that true? And like, what are the aspects of you that you had at work at that time? And that might be, using a particular skill set, or like, helping someone, or working
Yeah.
with people, or um, interrogating what makes you feel good when you have felt your best, and how you could
Yeah.
leverage that ahead. And I think also you should obviously look at the low points, but I wouldn't dwell on that too much. And then I also just think part of this is I would kind of encourage this person to do a bit of wildcard thinking around how could
What's
you
that?
apply. So just if this person really feels like they're in the wrong industry or the wrong field, what is an application of their strengths and skill sets in something in a totally different context?
Mm.
If you are extroverted and you love people and you're in a desk job, but you love the outdoors, maybe you could go and work in like forest school or something. I don't know.
Mm.
I'm making
Mm.
this up, but I think
Yeah, I
I
see what
think
you
there's a
mean. I
lot
see
to
what you
be
mean.
said for like
Yeah,
totally
get
lateral
bored.
thinking.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
nice, nice. Good tips.
Um,
Very,
you know,
very good
I
tips.
wouldn't I wouldn't just focus on like what jobs are out there and just repeatedly applying, because I think if they've had a number of jobs that haven't worked out, that probably sends you a message about you're maybe not doing something that plays to your own strengths, and there may be a way more enjoyable version. So that's it. We've made it to the end. Congratulations for
Hurrah!
listening.
Hurrah!
Hurrah! Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this ride. We hope you enjoyed it. Wherever you have found us, please give us some stars and let us know what you think. Have a great day.
Bye.